Blood pooled under her wheelchair, but they didn't see the wounds, only her skin. As the lasers from their guns danced across her chest, they never imagined she had medals of honor, or that the army was already on its way. The sun had barely risen when Captain Naomi Briggs wheeled herself out of the rehab center's automatic glass doors. The chill of the early morning air bit through her field jacket. The same jacket she had worn in Syria, torn, faded, and still stained in places where blood hadn't completely washed out. But this morning wasn't about war. This morning was about freedom. It was the first time she was allowed to leave the military rehab unit on her own. No guards, no nurse, no one checking her vitals every hour. She was cleared to return to society, or so she thought. She rolled through the parking lot, her movement smooth and trained, despite the ache in her arms from months of reconditioning. The wheelchair wasn't a prison to her anymore. It was a new kind of armor, one she'd earned through fire and blood, both figurative and literal. Her spinal injury hadn't been an accident. It had come during an ambush in a burned-out village in Kandahar, where she'd carried 2 injured men on her back while taking shrapnel to her lower spine.
Nice.
Even when she could no longer feel her legs. She'd continued compressions on a dying corporal until the evac helicopter arrived. Her name had echoed through command channels, through presidential briefings, through entire military hospitals as a symbol of unbreakable will. And yet, here in this country, in her own hometown of Stonebrook, Georgia, Naomi was just another black woman in a wheelchair. She had driven herself. Yes, driven. Using the specially outfitted SUV the military had customized for her. From the VA center on the outskirts of Atlanta back towards Stonebrook, determined to surprise her sister, who didn't expect her until the weekend. Her family still lived in the house where they were raised humble. A place with memories etched in every wall and picture frame. Naomi was excited to sit in the kitchen with her sister and their niece, eat cornbread and stew, and maybe forget the pain for one day. But she never made it. About 20 miles outside of Stonebrook, her SUV began to stutter and sputter. The gas gauge blinked red, but Naomi was sure she'd filled it. But something was wrong. She looked over the dash just in time to see smoke start billowing from the hood. She managed to pull off the road into a gas station Granger's quick fula. Dusty old corner lot with flickering lights and a single worker asleep behind thick bulletproof glass. Naomi opened the door, braced herself, and shifted into her wheelchair. The maneuver practiced and fluid. But as she rolled toward the station, a wave of dizziness hit her, then pain, sharp, hot, her shoulder. She looked down and saw blood soaking through her jacket. Her hand trembled as she reached for her phone. That's when she heard the first shout. "Hey, back away from the building." Naomi turned her chair. With effort and saw 2 Stonebrook PD patrol cars screeching to a halt, gravel flying from under their tires, lights flashing, sirens screaming. She blinked, confused. Her phone had barely connected with emergency dispatch. 4 officers jumped out, hands already on their weapons. One of them, a tall white man with a crew cut and mirrored sunglasses, pointed at her and barked again. "Hands where I can see them." Naomi instinctively raised her hands, palms open. "I'm injured," she said. "My U.S. Army, shut it," barked another officer, this one younger, sneering as he drew closer. "Put the weapon down." "What weapon?" "I don't," she began, but the red dot of a laser sight flickered across her chest. It danced over the silver dog tag, glinting. Outside her shirt and her mind, it was Kandahar again. The hands that had tied field tourniquets on soldiers younger than her were now trembling in the air, stained with her own blood. The country she'd fought for was now pressing triggers against her. Behind the police, a woman in a bathrobe was filming from a porch, her phone shaking in disbelief. The lead officer, the one with the sunglasses, stalked toward Naomi's chair. With a smirk, "What is this? A setup? You stole that uniform?" Naomi breathed hard, not from fear, but fury. "I earned this uniform," she said, her voice like steel. "I bled in it." "Sure you did," said the officer, nudging her wheelchair with his boot. "Probably shot somebody for it, huh? Or got it at a Halloween store." "Sir, I need medical help. There's something wrong with my vehicle." "Think someone tampered with it," and I'm injured. Please, you're not the victim here, the younger cop snapped. You're the suspect. Another officer circled behind her and ripped her backpack off the back of her wheelchair. He dumped its contents on the ground: documents, service medals, a small photo of her platoon. They scattered like leaves. Smirking officer picked up the Purple Heart medal, rolled it in his fingers. Wow, you really went all in on this costume, huh? Naomi didn't move. Couldn't move. Every breath was fire, and every second felt like betrayal wrapped in a uniform. Then, from the radio on one cop's shoulder came a burst of static. Be advised, incoming military transport en route to quick fuel. Repeat, en route now. The officers all looked at each other. What the hell? Said one of them. Just then, over the horizon, the low rumble of engines echoed across the sky. Naomi turned her head slowly. The pain was worse now. She was fading, but the sound was unmistakable. Humvees, her people, her brothers and sisters in arms. The officer with the sunglasses stepped back. His smile was gone. A convoy of 3 army vehicles pulled into the lot, tires crunching gravel. The lead vehicle bore the insignia of Joint Military Medical Command. The door opened, and out stepped Major General Lucille McAllister, a tall, black woman with a command presence that made the air itself straighten. She surveyed the scene in silence. Then her voice rang out, "Step away from my soldier." The police hesitated. Naomi, fading fast, whispered, "You're late, General." McAllister strode to her and kneeled, gently touching her shoulder. "And you're still the toughest one in the room." The officers were surrounded in seconds. MPs appeared from the Humvees, weapons ready but disciplined. Radios crackled. Orders barked. Naomi was lifted gently onto a stretcher, her blood staining the white sheet like a flag. As she was wheeled away, she looked back at the cops, now disarmed, confused, and surrounded. "You should have listened," she murmured. "I tried to tell you. The story didn't end at that." Gas station. No, it was only beginning. Cameras would roll, news would break, protests would ignite. And Naomi Briggs, a soldier, the survivor, the wheelchair-bound warrior, was about to become the name this country couldn't ignore. The footage surfaced online barely 20 minutes after Naomi Briggs was airlifted from Granger's Quick Fuel. A teenage girl named Maya Torres, standing on the porch across the street in her fuzzy pink bathrobe, had filmed nearly the entire confrontation on her phone. The tremble in her hands made the footage shaky, but her narration, terrified and furious, got straight to the heart of the nation. "Oh my God," she whispered on the video, zooming in on Naomi, blood staining her jacket. "They got guns on her, and she's in a wheelchair." "What the hell? She said she's a soldier. My God, they're mocking her." By the time Naomi arrived at Walter Reed Military Hospital in D.C. under military escort, the video had racked up over 1.4 million views. Within 2 hours, it was on every major news outlet. CNN, breaking. Officers detain injured Army captain in wheelchair at gunpoint. Was it racial profiling? MSNBC, disabled veteran held at gunpoint by police military. Investigating Fox News. Confusion or criminality? Police stop decorated vet in stunning confrontation. Twitter X. Hashtag justice for Naomi. Hashtag veteran respect. Hashtag Stonebrook shambled back in Stonebrook. The police department scrambled. Chief Harold Maynard, a man known more for his golf swing than policy enforcement, stammered through a hastily arranged press conference. This was a misunderstanding. Officers responded to a possible call of a car theft and reacted accordingly to protect the community. When pressed about the blood, the wheelchair, or the medals spilled on the pavement, Maynard only grew redder. "I don't have all the facts yet," he muttered, but the public wasn't waiting by that afternoon. Thousands of people had gathered in front of Stonebrook City Hall, waving flags, American military, and pride-holding signs like, "She served." "You failed. A medal earned should never be met with a gun. Respect our black veterans." Inside the sterile white walls of Walter Reed, Naomi lay in bed, her shoulders stitched, her vitals steady, and her spirit still unreadable. She stared at the ceiling, her jaw clenched as the images played in her mind like a looping tape. The flickering gas station lights, the laughing officers. The cold metal of the gun pointed at her chest. The familiar click of a safety turned off. More than anything, she remembered their eyes, not afraid, not unsure, just ... dismissive, as if her blood didn't matter, as if her silence would be automatic. But it wasn't. She turned her head slowly when she heard boots in the hallway. A knock. "Come in," she said. General McAllister stepped into the room, flanked by 2 JAG officers and Naomi's old friend from deployment, Staff Sergeant Elijah Krosostaki. Deep-voiced man who'd once carried Naomi on his back across a sniper-ridden field when she broke her ankle in Syria. "Hey," Captain Cross said, giving a low whistle. "You always find the loudest way to come home, huh?" Naomi allowed the corners of her mouth to twitch. "Guess I like making headlines." McAllister didn't sit. She stood by the bed, hands clasped tightly behind her back. "How are you feeling?" "Like my country just flipped a coin on whether I lived or died," Naomi replied. The general nodded. "We've launched a full federal inquiry. The military police are coordinating with the DOJ, and as of this morning, every officer on that scene has been placed on administrative leave." Naomi's eyes narrowed. "Leave?" Cross leaned against the windowsill, arms folded. Temporary. That's all they can do until charges are filed. But believe me, they're building the case. Public pressure's lighting a fire under it." Naomi gestured toward the television across the room, where news channels still ran the footage. "On loop? That fire better burn down the whole corrupt system." McAllister approached her bedside and gently placed a sealed manila envelope on her lap. "We've also prepped something for you, if you're ready." Naomi opened it. Inside was a federal notice of support, media protection order, and most notably, an invitation to speak before Congress about police violence against disabled veterans. She blinked. "Why me?" she asked, not in false modesty but in bitter awareness. The general didn't hesitate, because they tried to erase you. Now the world wants to listen. 2 days later, Naomi sat before a sea of microphones and cameras at the U.S. Capitol. Her voice was steady, though her hands trembled as she wheeled herself forward. "My name is Captain Naomi Briggs. I served 14 years in the United States Army. I earned a Bronze Star, a Purple Heart, and 6 commendation medals. I led medics in the middle of ambush zones. I treated civilians under fire. I have scars you can't see and pain that doesn't fit into a box. But none of that mattered when I rolled into that gas station." She paused. "All those officers saw was a bleeding black woman in a wheelchair. They didn't see the service. They didn't see the sacrifice. They didn't even see a human being." She looked straight into the cameras, and they're not alone. The testimony sparked a storm. Lawmakers demanded investigations into how veterans, particularly black and disabled ones, were treated by law enforcement. Petitions swelled to millions of signatures. Protests expanded across cities, now marching not only for racial justice, but for veteran dignity. But the fight didn't end with speeches. Back in Stonebrook, City Council convened an emergency session. The town's image was under fire. Businesses began pulling sponsorships. The mayor tried to dodge accountability. Until Naomi's family, led by her sister Tamika, held a vigil and press conference on their own front lawn. She didn't survive IED blasts in Iraq to be gunned down by her own country, Tamika said, her voice breaking. Meanwhile, the officers involved were revealed to have prior complaints, buried use of force reports, racial bias claims, one even involved in an off-duty assault case. The cover-up unraveled in real time. Naomi refused to fade from the headlines. She began a national speaking tour, visiting VA hospitals, colleges, and military academies. She met with grieving mothers who'd lost sons to unjust traffic stops. She comforted disabled veterans who whispered, "I thought I was alone." And then she did the unthinkable. She returned to Granger's Quick Fuel. It had taken weeks to find the courage. She was surrounded by cameras, supporters, and her military family. McAllister stood by her side. Cross held the door open. Naomi rolled to the exact spot where her blood had soaked the pavement. She reached into her jacket and took out a small bronze plaque. With Cross's help, she affixed it to the pole by the gas pump. It read, Here stood a soldier. She bled not just from battle, but from bias, and she survived them both. Reporters wept. The live stream went viral in minutes. The plaque was approved by city ordinance a week later, one of the first of its kind. Still, the threats came. Naomi received anonymous letters. You made us look bad. You're not a hero, you're a liar. Go back to the desert. But she also received thousands of thank you notes. Drawings from children, letters from soldiers, messages from people in wheelchairs who had never seen themselves treated like warriors. One morning, Naomi sat in her home, staring at a letter with a trembling hand. It was from a cop's widow. Her husband had died in the line of duty, but she wrote that Naomi's strength helped her understand that justice must apply to everyone, especially those sworn to protect. Naomi stared out her window for a long time, and for the first time in months she smiled, not the forced public smile for cameras, but a real one, quiet, painful, healing. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity. News vans lined the block outside the Stonebrook County Courthouse like vultures circling a battlefield. Reporters elbowed one another for seats. Students held handwritten signs outside in silent protest, and veterans, both in uniform and civilian clothes, waited in respectful silence. The stakes weren't just high. They were historic. Inside, Naomi sat flanked by her attorney, Judith Bellamy, a razor-sharp civil rights lawyer with a record of dismantling police corruption case by case. On Naomi's left sat General McAllister, not as a witness, but as moral force. Her silent presence alone carried weight that shook the room. The officers involved in the gas station incident were seated across the aisle, uniforms replaced with stiff gray suits. Their expressions varied: embarrassment, arrogance, barely veiled hostility. Only one of them, Officer Trey Hollins, looked visibly shaken. His hands twitched, and his foot tapped restlessly under the table. Unlike the others, he hadn't smiled. In weeks, the judge entered Honorable Denise Proctor, an aging black woman known for taking zero nonsense from anyone, regardless of badge or title. All rise. The room stood. Naomi didn't have to. Judge Proctor nodded toward her gently. Captain Briggs, thank you for your service. You may remain seated. Naomi gave a slow nod. The prosecution began with the body cam footage, undeniable, uncut, and unedited. The jury watched the video in silence. The audio clearly capturing the mocking tone of officers as they drew guns, barked orders, and accused her of faking injuries. Several jurors visibly winced when the video showed one officer nudging Naomi's wheelchair with his boot. She's probably faking it. Bet she rolled in from a VA scam line. This ain't no soldier. This is another damn hustler. The courtroom atmosphere shifted from tense to disgusted. Then came the medical records. Naomi's combat injuries were real, documented, verified. Her medal soth, service impeccable. The military provided sworn affidavits. Her superior officers, including McAllister, submitted testimony verifying her heroism, valor, and sacrifice. Judith Bellamy rose to speak. My client, she began, was bleeding from a reopened shrapnel wound. Sitting in a wheelchair, unarmed, and wearing a uniform she earned in blood. And yet the officers saw not a soldier, they saw a threat. Her voice grew sharper. They didn't ask if she needed help. They assumed guilt. They humiliated her, and had the military not intervened, she might not be alive today. On the third day of the trial, a surprise shift occurred. Officer Trey Hollins requested to take the stand, against the advice of his lawyer. When he sat down, he didn't look at his fellow officers. He looked at Naomi. I want to apologize, he said, voice cracking. Not because I got caught, but because I saw it happening. I didn't stop it. A murmur swept through the gallery. I've been a cop for 6 years, and I've seen bias. I've heard the jokes in locker rooms. I've ignored it because I didn't want to be the guy who turned on the others. But that day at the gas station, I saw the blood on her jacket. I saw the medals, and I still kept my hand on my gun. Paused, swallowing hard. She said she was a soldier. I didn't believe her because of the color of her skin. Judge Proctor leaned forward. Officer Hollins, are you saying? This was racial profiling? He nodded slowly. Yes, Your Honor, I am. Gasps echoed across the room. One of the other officers cursed under his breath. The defense table erupted in whispered panic. Naomi's lawyer calmly pushed her glasses up and smiled. Hollins continued. I remember one of the others saying, "These types always find a way to play the victim," and I laughed. I laughed with them. I hated myself for it the second. I saw the army convoy pull up, turned again to Naomi. I don't expect forgiveness, I just... I needed to say it. Naomi didn't speak. She didn't nod. But her silence was heavier than words. With Hollins' testimony, the prosecution had what it needed, not just evidence, but confirmation from within. The jury was dismissed to deliberate, but it didn't take long. All 4 officers were found. Liable for excessive force, violation of civil rights, and targeted racial harassment. Stonebrook PD was ordered to pay $6.2 million in damages to Naomi Briggs. The state followed up with a criminal inquiry into systemic racism and misconduct in the department's practices. It's going back 10 years. But it wasn't just about the money. The verdict rippled across. America Naomi became the centerpiece of a national campaign calling for the Briggs Reform, a proposed federal bill focused on 3 pillars. Veteran protection protocols, mandatory recognition and immediate aid for veterans in distress by law enforcement, disabled civilian safety clause, prohibition of excessive force against mobility challenged individuals and less immediate threat, is confirmed. Bias accountability tracking, a federal database of all law enforcement officers with sustained misconduct complaints involving race, gender, or disability. The bill gained bipartisan momentum within weeks. Across the country, police departments were forced to review policies. Towns held forums. Trainings were updated. Conversations that had long been buried beneath bureaucracy finally found breath. But Naomi didn't stop there. Instead of disappearing into silence or settling into a comfortable post-settlement life, she launched a nonprofit called Wheel Forward, a foundation aimed at supporting veterans of color, especially those with physical disabilities, in their fight for justice, accessibility, dignity. She hired other disabled vets. She partnered with law schools. She pushed for training programs in police academies, where she spoke directly to recruits. You won't remember every traffic stop, she told one class, but the person on the other end will never forget how you made them feel.
At one
speech, she was approached by a young black girl in a wheelchair with a trembling voice. Didn't think someone like us could fight back. Naomi kneeled beside her, eyes fierce and soft all at once. We're not done fighting, baby. We're just getting started. The silence in the hospital corridor wasn't just the absence of sound, it was the weight of tension pressing against the walls like a loaded spring. Captain Alana Braxton sat motionless in her wheelchair, the sterile scent of antiseptic stinging her senses as she stared blankly at the white tiles. Her shoulder was patched up, but the pain wasn't gonna neither. From the wound, nor from the humiliation of having loaded guns pointed at her while she bled. The doctors treated her, but it was the nurse who whispered, "Thank you for your service," while adjusting her for that brought tears to her eyes. It wasn't just gratitude, it was recognition. For the first time since the incident, someone looked past her wheelchair, past her blood, past her skin, and saw her. Across the city, chaos quietly brewed. The footage was circulating. Military drones picked up multiple uploads showing cops mocking and drawing weapons on a U.S. Army captain. Social media was ablaze. National attention descended on the town like a storm. But the cops, still smug, still laughing, still untouchable. Or so they thought. At the police station, Officer Delaney smirked as he recounted the story to his fellow officers. "You should have seen her face," he chuckled, slapping his thigh, trying to roll away like she's in a Fast and Furious. Sequel, the room burst into cruel laughter. No remorse. No shame. Only ignorance, but deep within Fort McAllister, Colonel Nathan Green was not laughing. Green was a hardened Army strategist who'd served beside Alana in Kandahar. He remembered her bravery when she dragged two wounded men out of a burning Humvee under enemy fire. He remembered how she stabilized a bleeding Afghan child with one hand while fending off insurgents with the other. And when he saw the footage, on his secure line, when he saw her eyes widen in terror, while being mocked and nearly shot, he felt something deep inside him snap. He didn't make a statement. He made a call. Within an hour, 3 armored vehicles rolled silently into the precinct's parking lot. The officers inside laughed nervously at first, thinking it was just a training drill. That was, until the doors opened and a squad of military police stepped out, fully geared. Then came a commanding voice, deep, steady, dangerous. "This precinct is now under federal investigation. Stand down." Panic erupted. Delaney tried to protest, tried to wave his badge like a shield. "You can't do this," he shouted. "We didn't do anything wrong." "Tell it to the Pentagon," replied Staff Sergeant Rios, gripping his sidearm with the same cold efficiency Alana once trained him in. Alana, still in the hospital, was notified through a secure tablet. When she saw the headline, U.S. Army takes over local police precinct amid abuse scandal, she didn't smile. Her lips tightened instead, her eyes focused. Justice had started its march, but the war wasn't over. Back at the precinct, evidence began to vanish. Body cam footage mysteriously disappeared. Logs were accidentally erased. And yet the Army had already anticipated this. Satellites. Private citizens. Even the convenience store security system, everything was already backed up and secured. Under military jurisdiction, a system Delaney and his cronies thought they could hide behind was now a glass house. But beyond the courtroom drama and military operation, the city itself began to transform. Community leaders who had long been silenced came forward. A town hall was called, and for the first time, black veterans, disabled citizens, and survivors of police brutality stood on the same platform as federal agents and lawmakers. The voice of the people was no longer a whisper, it was a roar. Meanwhile, Alana's recovery took a toll. Her body healed slowly, but the emotional wounds refused to scab over. The nightmares returned, flashbacks of Afghanistan and the street, where she was almost executed by the very people she'd sworn to protect. But she wasn't alone anymore. Dr. Lena Marquez, civilian trauma therapist contracted by the Army, sat across from her during each session. Lena never forced her to speak. She just waited, patient and calm, until Alana was ready. And when Alana finally did talk about the betrayal, the fear, the rage, something shifted. Alana wasn't just healing. Just about her anymore. It was about the system. It's about every soldier who came home in a wheelchair and was treated like less. About every woman who bled while being told to calm down. About every black American who had to carry not just history, but a target on their back. So when the Joint Chiefs extended an invitation to Washington to testify, Alana didn't hesitate. But before she could leave, quote, a quiet knock came at her hospital door. It was Private First Class David Kinley, the rookie cop who refused to join the others during the assault. He stood nervously, holding a folded paper in trembling hands. "I resigned," he whispered. "I couldn't be part of that, and I'm sorry, ma'am." She didn't answer immediately. Her gaze searched his face not for excuses, but for sincerity. And when she nodded slowly, Kinley exhaled, as if released from shackles. "You want to do better?" she asked. "Then don't walk away. Stand up louder." That night, before boarding her military plane to D.C., Alana watched. From her window as a small group of civilians, mostly wheelchair users and veterans, gathered outside the hospital. They held signs not of protest, but of solidarity. "We see you, Captain Braxton. Not all battles are fought abroad. Our blood built this nation, too." As the engines roared and the city lights faded below, Alana didn't feel like a victim. She felt like a soldier again, and the next war would be fought in a courtroom. The room was heavy with silence, the kind that holds grief and determination in the same breath. Captain Celine Moore sat with her prosthetic leg propped up on the armrest of her armchair, scrolling through the security footage sent to her by one of her former lieutenants, now stationed at the local National Guard facility. Her fingers trembled with rage. The moment she saw Janelle bleeding in a wheelchair, with guns pointed at her chest while she cried out her identity. Her composure fractured. Janelle Carter wasn't just another name to her. She was Celine's cousin, her childhood best friend, her goddaughter's mother, the woman who took a bullet on the front lines of advocacy for women's shelters, yet never stopped smiling through it all. And now the very country she bled for had turned its weapons on her while she was visibly injured, sitting down unarmed and helpless. Selena's jaw clenched. Her military training told her to assess calmly, but her heart was already drawing up a battle plan. She pulled out her old satellite phone and dialed a number she hadn't used in 3 years. The line clicked, then a voice on the other end answered with urgency. "General Klein here." Celine didn't waste a second. "We've got a civilian situation escalating. Civil rights violation. Multiple police units. I need a tactical team ready. Standby mode. Authorization code. Delta Co 17. You're pulling." Delta Co. Klein's voice sharpened. What happened? A disabled woman was surrounded and humiliated by officers with weapons drawn. She's bleeding and in a wheelchair. No crime committed. Her name is Janelle Carter. There was a pause. Then Klein replied, "I'll have boots on the ground in 20. What's your position?" Celine gave her coordinates. Back at the precinct. The officers were doing damage control. Lieutenant Halbridge was barking orders, more concerned with the viral spread of the video than with the condition of the woman it showed. They were reviewing surveillance footage, still trying to find any justification they could use in court. Anything to twist the narrative. A gun-shaped object in her lap. Aggressive motion of the hand. Something, anything, but it wasn't there. Sergeant Miles stood off to the side, deeply uncomfortable. He had been there when the officers swarmed Janelle. He hadn't drawn his weapon, but he hadn't intervened either. His conscience burned. He kept replaying the sound of her voice over and over. "I served this country. You're ready to kill me for being black in a chair?" The front doors slammed open. 2 men in army fatigues, flanked by military police, stepped in with crisp, assertive movements. Behind them came Celine, dressed in her service uniform, her bronze service medals catching the lobby light. Every step she took was powered by fury, but controlled by discipline. Her voice echoed through the station as she addressed everyone in the lobby. "Where's Officer Kent and Officer Laramie?" The desk sergeant hesitated. "Ma'am, this is a police department. You don't have authority." Celine held up a federal document. "This is a civil rights mobilization warrant signed by a federal judge and General Klein. My team and I have temporary jurisdiction for the next 48 hours to conduct an internal review and detain officers under suspicion of abuse of force. Get me, Kent, and Laramie." The sergeant's eyes widened. The room fell into stunned silence. Meanwhile, Janelle was lying in the hospital, in her arm emotionally shattered. Her mother sat at her bedside, silently holding her hand. Her daughter, Marley, had been taken to a neighbor's house for the night. News crews were flooding the hospital entrance, but Janelle hadn't said a word to anyone except to the nurse who treated her injuries. She stared at the ceiling. Watching the fan rotate slowly in her mind, she heard every insult. "Hands where?" "I can see them." "Ma'am, don't reach." "She's acting suspicious, back away. She might be armed." "Oh, you think you're special because you're in a chair?" Celine entered quietly, placing a hand on her cousin's arm. "You don't have to talk," Celine said gently. "I'm not here as a soldier. I'm here as your family. But just know, I'm not leaving until justice stands on its own 2 feet. Janelle finally turned her head. Her voice cracked, barely audible. "Why did they hate me so much?" "All I was doing was bleeding in front of them?" Celine knelt down beside her. "They don't hate you," she whispered. "They fear the truth you represent. That a black woman in a wheelchair, injured, wounded, but still breathing, is stronger than every badge they hide behind." That night, the Army's investigation began. Interviews, body cam analysis, background reviews, and Celine took the lead. She personally interrogated Officer Kent, who had been the first to draw his weapon on Janelle. Sitting across from him, she placed the photos from that night on the table. "You aimed at a woman bleeding out, got in a mobility aid, clearly shouting that she was a veteran and a victim. "Explain to me what made you feel so threatened." Kent looked smug. "We got a call about a suspicious individual. It was dark. She was acting erratic." Acting erratic. Celine interrupted. "You mean begging for help? Screaming in pain? She didn't look injured? It could have been a ploy? She had blood pouring down her side, officer? I've seen battlefield wounds. I know the difference between a ploy and a punctured lung. And you pointed your weapon first." He shifted uncomfortably. "You weren't there. I didn't need to be," she said, narrowing her eyes. "Your body cam was. See, Kent, we're not just reviewing your footage, we're reconstructing it with AI rendering, matching your line of sight, and analyzing pupil dilation. We know what you saw. We know when you panicked. We know when your bias kicked in." He swallowed hard. Celine stood. "You're suspended indefinitely. The DOJ will be in touch." News spread fast. Social media exploded. Hashtag justice for Janelle. Hashtag wheelchair not weapon. Hashtag veteran not victim. The community rallied behind her. Old Army buddies, fellow advocates, civil rights organizations, all spoke out. Donations poured in for her legal defense. And most importantly, survivors from the shelters she helped build came forward to testify on her character. "She saved my life," one woman said tearfully on camera. "They tried to take hers because of what? Because of fear wrapped in blue fabric." And while the officers began crumbling under legal pressure, City Council held an emergency meeting. Janelle's case had now triggered a federal civil rights audit across the entire department. Past complaints, settlements, unreported body, cam failures. The dominoes were falling fast, and at the center of it all, a woman in recovery, too bruised to stand, but too powerful to silence, was writing a speech. Janelle was going to speak. On record, on the courthouse steps, and everyone would hear it. The courthouse steps were packed. A sea of faces, old and young, black and white veterans and civilians stood shoulder to shoulder. Reporters shoved microphones toward Captain Janelle Carter's face, capturing every word she uttered with breathless intensity. Her wheelchair rested firmly in place. Her injuries were healing, but the fire in her eyes burned brighter than ever. "This isn't just about me, Janelle," began, voice steady but powerful. "It's about every veteran who came home wounded and forgotten. It's about every disabled person who's been treated like a criminal. It's about a system that looks at our bodies and ignores our stories." She paused, letting the words settle over the crowd. "I'm a soldier. I'm a black woman. I am the living proof that strength doesn't always stand on two legs. And today, I demand justice not just for me, but for all of us who have been pushed into the shadows." Cheers erupted. Signs waved. Cameras flashed from the side of the crowd. Celine Moore watched proudly. Beside her, Dr. Lena Marquez took a shaky breath, wiping tears from her eyes. For the first time in weeks, a moment of hope shimmered in the air. But hope had its enemies. Back inside the courthouse, the defense was mounting a fierce campaign to discredit Janelle. They questioned her medical records, tried to paint her as emotionally unstable, suggested her injuries were exaggerated, and implied her uniform was worn for sympathy. Janelle sat through the cross-examination like steel unbreakable, unwavering. Her attorney, Judith Bellamy, was relentless. "Captain Carter," she asked, "what was your state of mind during the incident?" "Fear," Janelle replied, voice calm. "Because those officers didn't see me as a human being deserving of respect or care. They saw me as a threat because of my race and my disability." Days turned into weeks. The trial captivated the nation. Legislators drafted new bills, protesters marched, and veterans organizations pledged support. Meanwhile, inside the walls of the Army base, a new initiative was born. Project Vanguard aimed to place veterans like Janelle and Celine in liaison roles with local police departments to train officers, provide perspective, and build bridges between military service members and law enforcement. Celine was appointed the project lead, but with every step forward, threats lurked. Janelle's family received anonymous letters. Her home was vandalized. Online trolls harassed her social media accounts. Still, she refused to back down. One night, after a fiery rally in Washington, D.C., Janelle received a call. It was General McAllister. "We need you back on active duty." The general said, "Your voice is powerful. The country needs you." Janelle smiled faintly. "I'm not sure I'm ready." "You don't have to be. Just show up. We'll take it from there." The war outside was far from over, but inside her, a new battle raged, a battle for healing, for recognition, and for change, and she would win it. The days after the announcement of her return to active duty were filled with a mixture of celebration and anxiety. Janelle Carter found herself thrust into the spotlight in ways she never wanted, but had learned to harness in the weeks prior. Her nonprofit Wheel Forward had gained significant traction, partnering with veterans hospitals, civil rights groups, and legal advocates. The foundation was becoming a beacon for disabled and minority veterans nationwide. But the scars were deep. During her first public address after the court victory, Janelle had spoken about the psychological trauma, the flashbacks, the anxiety attacks, the nights spent staring at the ceiling, haunted by the image of officers pointing guns at her. Yet she knew healing wouldn't come from silence. One morning, in a Washington, D.C. conference room, Janelle sat with a panel of military and civilian leaders, strategizing the rollout of Project Vanguard. Celine Moore was there, energetic and driven, alongside General McAllister and several congressional representatives. "This is not just a training program," Janelle said firmly. "This is about accountability. It's about reshaping the narrative so that no veteran or any citizens ever treated like I was." Celine nodded. "We'll embed veterans in police departments as mentors and first responders who understand trauma, race, and disability," General McAllister added, "and we'll push for federal legislation mandating these programs nationwide." The conversation was interrupted by a phone call. Janelle's assistant whispered something urgent. She stepped outside, the words on the other end chilled her. Another incident. A black veteran in a wheelchair had been brutalized during a routine traffic stop, his service record ignored. His cries for help dismissed. Janelle's fists clenched. "This isn't isolated," she told Celine later that day. "It's systemic." Together they launched an emergency response task force within Wheel Forward to provide immediate legal and medical aid to victims as well as public advocacy, but their rising influence made them targets. One evening, Janelle arrived home to find her front door splintered. The word "traitor" spray-painted in red across her porch. "Marley." Her daughter clung to her side, eyes wide. "We're safe," Janelle assured her, though her voice shook. Security was tightened. Media attention intensified. The threat level was real, but Janelle refused to back down. She reached out to an old friend from her military intelligence days, Lieutenant Marcus Hayes. "Marcus," she said during a late-night video call, "I need your help tracking these threats. They're coordinated. Someone doesn't want us to succeed." Marcus leaned back, fingers steepled. "I'll get my team on it. Expect results soon." Meanwhile, Celine prepared to testify before Congress on the importance of veteran integration in law enforcement and the urgent need for nationwide reform. Their fight was no longer local. It was national, political, and deeply personal. 1. Afternoon, during a congressional hearing packed with lawmakers, media, and advocacy groups, Celine took the stand. She recounted the story of Janelle's attack, the police department's cover-up, and the Army's intervention. She ended with a simple, powerful statement. "We owe our veterans more than gratitude. We owe them respect. We owe them justice." The bill that emerged from that hearing named the Veterans Protection and Police Accountability Act garnered overwhelming bipartisan support. It mandated training on veteran-specific trauma for all law enforcement officers, real-time integration of veteran status checks in police databases, stronger penalties for misuse of force against disabled individuals, federal oversight of departments with histories of abuse for the first time in years. Janelle and Celine saw a tangible shift, but the battle wasn't over. Late one night, as Janelle sat reviewing plans for a nationwide speaking tour, a knock came at her door. She opened it cautiously. Standing there was Officer Trey Hollins, the one who had confessed during the earlier trial. "I want to make amends," he said quietly. "I'm working with the DOJ now. helping expose corruption. I want to help. Janelle looked at him long and hard. Words aren't enough, officer, she said. Show me with actions. He nodded, a flicker of hope and regret in his eyes. As the sun rose, Janelle and Celine prepared for the next chapter, the public battle to change a nation's heart and laws. Because for them, victory was more than a verdict. It was a promise. The sun rose over Washington, D.C., casting long golden beams through the windows of the Capitol, building where Captain Janelle Carter prepared to deliver what could be the defining speech of her life. Months had passed since. The incident at the gas station, months filled with court battles, sleepless nights, threats, and fierce advocacy. Janelle's journey had become a symbol not only of one woman's fight, but of an entire movement demanding justice, recognition, and reform inside the chamber. Members of Congress took their seats. Reporters hushed as the session commenced. Veterans, activists, families affected by police violence, and military personnel filled the galleries. Eyes fixed on the podium, Janelle wheeled herself to the microphone, steady, dignified, a medal pinned proudly on her chest. My fellow Americans, she began, voice resonant with quiet strength, I stand before you today not just as a soldier, a veteran, or a woman in a wheelchair. Stand as a witness to injustice, a voice for those too often ignored, and a beacon for change. She spoke of the day she was humiliated and endangered, and the courage it takes now to demand accountability. She called on lawmakers to pass the Veterans Protection and Police Accountability Act, emphasizing that true justice requires systemic change, training, and respect for the dignity of all people, especially those who have sacrificed for this nation. Her words ignited a standing ovation. Outside, protests erupted not of anger, but of hope. Across cities, thousands gathered to celebrate the movement she helped galvanize. News networks hailed the speech as historic. A turning point in the weeks that followed, the bill sailed through Congress and was signed into law, a triumph credited. Two relentless advocates like Janelle and Celine. Back home, Janelle held Marley close. The world still had shadows, but now there was light. Celine and Janelle stood together at the new Wheel Forward Veterans Center, a facility dedicated to supporting disabled veterans of color, providing medical care, legal aid, and counseling. This is only the beginning, Celine said, smiling. Janelle nodded. For every scar, every story, every fight, we owe the next generation more than silence. As the sun set on that historic day, a nation began to heal because one woman's courage turned tragedy into transformation. The courtroom battles were over. The laws were passed. The headlines had faded from the front pages. But for Captain Janelle Carter, the real work had just begun. Months after the landmark victory, Janelle found herself standing in a newly opened Veterans Center named in honor of those who, like her, had been sidelined and silenced. The Wheel Forward Center was a place of healing, hope, and advocacy. Inside the center, she met veterans with stories echoing her tales of bias, injury, and struggle. Each encounter reinforced the truth she had come to know. Justice was not a destination, but a journey. Celine Moore, now Director of Veteran Outreach, had expanded Project Vanguard nationally, partnering with police academies and military installations to train officers in trauma-informed responses. Together, they faced pushback from entrenched institutions resistant to change, from communities wary of police reform, and from personal threats that never fully disappeared. Yet, Janelle remained resolute. She began a nationwide speaking tour, sharing her story at universities, military bases, and community centers. At one event, a young woman in a wheelchair approached her with tears in her eyes. Because of you. Not afraid to tell my story, she said. Thank you. Janelle's smile was soft but fierce. Keep fighting, she told her. Our voices build the future. Though the scars of that night still lingered, Janelle embraced her role as both survivor and leader, knowing that the fight for justice was never truly over. But neither was the hope. The months following the passage of the Veterans Protection and Police Accountability Act marked a new chapter not only for Janelle Carter, but for a nation grappling With its past and striving toward justice, Janelle settled into a rhythm of work and recovery. Balancing her nonprofit duties, public speaking engagements, and her role as a mother to Marley. The scars, both physical and emotional, were a constant reminder of her journey. But they no longer defined her. Celine Moore's leadership in Project Vanguard had inspired numerous police departments to integrate veteran advisors and trauma specialists. The ripple effect was real. Policies changed. Officers were trained differently. And stories like Janelle's were no longer dismissed but heard. On a crisp autumn afternoon, Janelle visited the Arlington National Cemetery with Marley. Standing by the memorial wall, she traced the names of fallen comrades. "It's not just about remembering them," she told Marley. "It's about carrying their legacy forward." Marley nodded solemnly. Back at Wheel Forward's headquarters, new programs were launched, from mental health support groups to legal clinics designed to empower disabled veterans navigating a complex system. Janelle received an unexpected call from General McAllister, inviting her to serve as a consultant for the Pentagon's Task Force on Veteran Affairs. "This is a chance to influence policy at the highest level," he said. Janelle hesitated, but then accepted her journey from a bleeding soldier in a wheelchair. Targeted by police to a national leader advocating for systemic change was far from over, and as the sun set on another day, she knew the fight for dignity, respect, and justice was one she would carry with strength and grace. Years had passed since that fateful day when guns were drawn on Captain Janelle Carter in a wheelchair, bleeding and vulnerable, yet the memory remained vivid, not as a wound, but as a battle scar turned badge of honor. Janelle stood at the podium of the annual Wheel Forward Gala, the room filled with veterans, activists, lawmakers, and families. The air buzzed with hope and determination. Her speech was both a reflection and a rallying cry. "We've come far, but our work is far from done. For every victory, there are countless others still waiting for their voices to be heard. We must keep pushing, keep demanding, keep fighting." Her daughter Marley, now a teenager, sat proudly in the front row, a living testament to strength and hope. Celine Moore, beside her on the stage, smiled knowingly. Wheel Forward had become more than a nonprofit, it was a movement. Their influence had expanded internationally, advising allied militaries and police forces on disability rights and racial equity. Yet, Janelle never forgot the cost. In quieter moments, she sought solace in therapy and meditation, understanding that leadership required care for oneself as much as for others. One afternoon, as she reviewed new legislation drafts, a letter arrived from a young veteran in a remote town. "Your story saved me," it read. "Because of you, I found my voice." Janelle smiled, her legacy alive in every life she touched. The road ahead remained long and winding. But with each step, the promise of justice grew stronger. Several years had passed since the sweeping reforms and national recognition that followed the gas station incident. Captain Janelle Carter, now a respected advocate and military consultant, had carved a space where her voice could influence policy and culture alike. But beneath the progress, shadows lingered. Reports surfaced of isolated police departments resisting change, covert groups pushing back against veteran-led initiatives, and increasing hostility toward activists. Janelle knew the fight was far from over. One evening, while reviewing confidential intelligence reports, Celine Moore entered the room, urgency in her step. "Janelle, there's a new threat, coordinated attempts to undermine Project Vanguard and Wheel Forward. Through misinformation and infiltration." Janelle's eyes narrowed. "We need to expose them." Together, they mobilized a coalition of veterans, legal experts, and cyber specialists to counter the attacks. They organized community forums, increased transparency, and strengthened alliances with federal agencies. Meanwhile, Janelle continued her role at the Pentagon, pushing for advanced training programs and improved support systems for disabled veterans. Home. Marley was growing into a fierce young woman, inspired by her mother's resilience and leadership. Despite the mounting pressure, Janelle's resolve never wavered. "This movement is bigger than any one person," she reminded her team. "It's about the future we build together." And as the dawn broke on another challenging day, Janelle Carter faced the horizon with unwavering strength, ready to confront whatever shadows remained. The days grew longer and the battles more complex. With misinformation campaigns targeting their work, Janelle and Celine found themselves fighting not only systemic injustice but also the insidious spread of distrust seeded by those threatened by change. Public hearings became arenas for heated debate. Some lawmakers applauded Wheel Forward's successes, others questioned its influence, casting doubt with carefully veiled skepticism. But Janelle met every challenge with the same fierce clarity that had defined her since the beginning. She expanded partnerships with grassroots organizations, ensuring the voices of marginalized veterans were amplified. At a national summit on law enforcement reform, Canna delivered a stirring keynote, urging unity, compassion, and accountability. Her words resonated deeply. Our strength lies in our unyielding resolve to stand for what is right, even when the road is steep and the opposition fierce. We owe it to those who cannot stand for themselves. Back at Wheel Forward, the team developed new programs focused on mental health and community rebuilding, understanding that justice wasn't just legal, it was healing. Personal trials tested Janelle too. The weight of public life strained her relationships and health. But with Celine's support and Marley's growing independence, she navigated these challenges with grace. One evening, a letter arrived. Invitation from the United Nations to speak on global veterans' rights. The journey that began with a single act of courage now carried her onto the world stage. Janelle knew this was only the beginning of a broader fight for dignity and justice worldwide, and she was ready. Standing before a packed hall at the United Nations headquarters in New York City, Captain Janelle Carter felt the weight and honor of the moment. Delegates from every continent filled the room, their eyes fixed on a woman who had transformed personal tragedy into a movement that transcended borders. Janelle's speech was clear and impassioned. Veterans across the globe face not only the wounds of war, but the scars of neglect, discrimination, and misunderstanding. Our fight for justice is universal, crossing oceans, cultures, and politics. She outlined the work Wheel Forward had done and the lessons learned from Project Vanguard's success in bridging military and law enforcement divides. Her words sparked a wave of commitments, new partnerships, funding for veteran support programs, and pledges to combat systemic injustice. Yet, as the applause faded, Janelle knew this was just the first step. Back in the U.S., challenges persisted. Opposition forces doubled down, adapting tactics to slow progress. The personal cost to Janelle was tangible time away from Marley, the constant scrutiny, and the emotional toll. But her resolve was unwavering. At a quiet moment, Celine joined her, reminding Janelle that leadership meant sharing burdens and celebrating victories together. Their partnership, forged in battle and forged anew in advocacy, was the backbone of a movement that refused to be silenced. As Janelle looked toward the horizon, she knew the fight for veterans' dignity. Racial justice and disability rights was a marathon, and together, they would run it one determined step at a time. The Wheel Forward Veterans Center was alive with activity. Families gathered in support groups, veterans shared stories, and children played in the garden symbols of hope flourishing amid scars of struggle. Janelle Carter wheeled herself to the center's newest exhibit, a tribute wall dedicated to veterans who had faced injustice and risen above it. Her own name glowed among theirs, but she thought less of herself and more of those still fighting. Marley, now a young adult, stood beside her, her eyes bright with pride and determination. "Mom," she said softly, "your story changed everything for me and for so many others." Janelle smiled, feeling the weight of years lift. "We did this together, baby. Every voice matters." The phone buzzed, Celine calling with news of a breakthrough policy reform in Congress. Janelle laughed, tears welling. "That's what I like to hear." As evening settled, Janelle reflected on the journey. From a bleeding woman in a wheelchair facing armed officers, to a national leader inspiring change. The road had been long and hard, but she was exactly where she needed to be. A survivor. A warrior. A beacon. Her fight wasn't over, not by a long shot, but she was ready for every step ahead. Because now, she wasn't alone. Years had passed since the public outcry and legal victories that reshaped the nation's view on veteran rights and police accountability. Yet, the echoes of that fateful night, the night guns were drawn on a bleeding black woman in a wheelchair, still reverberated through the hearts of many. Captain Janelle Carter had become more than a symbol. She was a mentor, a leader, and a mother determined to forge a better path for the next generation. The Wheel Forward Veterans Center thrived, expanding its reach to rural areas and underserved communities. It's offering not just aid but empowerment. Marley, now a college student majoring in social justice, worked alongside her mother, embodying the spirit of resilience. Celine Moore had ascended to a senior role within the Department of Defense, influencing policy on a global scale. Together, they continued to challenge systems resistant to change, advocating for transparency, equity, and dignity. On a quiet afternoon, Janelle sat in the center's garden, watching a group of veterans share their stories with young cadets. A sense of peace washed over her. She whispered to herself, "This is why we fight. For this moment. For these lives." And as the sun set, casting a warm glow over the garden, Janelle knew that while the battle for justice was ongoing, the legacy she and her community built would endure. Because true change begins not with a single act, but with a movement. The Wheel Forward Veterans Center buzzed with energy as new programs launched to address mental health, job training, and community reintegration for disabled and minority veterans. Janelle Carter, now a seasoned advocate and public figure, balanced her demanding schedule with moments of quiet reflection. One afternoon, she received an invitation from the White House to participate in a national advisory panel focused on police reform and veteran affairs. "This is the kind of influence we dreamed of," Celine Moore said, beaming beside her. Janelle nodded. "It's a step. But the journey is long." At the panel, Janelle met leaders from diverse backgrounds, forging alliances that would strengthen nationwide reform efforts. Meanwhile, Marley prepared for her graduation, planning to follow in her mother's footsteps as a social justice attorney at home. Janelle and Marley shared late-night talks about hope, fear, and the future. "You've taught me what it means to be strong," Marley said softly. "I want to help others find that strength." Janelle smiled, pride swelling. "And you will. Together, we change the world." As the sun set beyond the city's skyline, looked ahead not just to battles yet to come, but to horizons filled with possibility. Because the story was no longer just hers. It belonged to everyone who believed in justice. And as the last rays of the sun touched the earth, Janelle Carter held a steadfast belief in her heart that this fight was not hers alone, but belonged to all who stand for justice, dignity, and equality. With every step and every voice there was the power to create change, and with that power, she moved forward into a new era future where every story would be heard and every right protected. The story did not end here. It was the beginning of a new journey,